Yeah, I think we're ready.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you may be joining us. And welcome to this Urbanism and Heritage lecture series of the Architecture, Heritage and Urbanism in West Africa Research Center. We are back fully after the breaking transmission last month. And so for this month, we are really excited to be having two lectures. Kicking off April 1st today with this lecture by Professor Olaoduku, the director of AHUWA, and Julia Robello, one of the early career researchers in the center. As we say in West Africa, Happy New Month. Now, the AHUWA Center is a research center at the University of Liverpool that is focused on looking at the urbanisms in West African society and the linkages between West Africa and the rest of the world. We are quite forward-facing, going beyond looking at cities in West Africa as mere case studies, but having an active urban laboratory that looks at urbanism and trends, heritage, past heritage, contemporary heritage, and urban futures from the lens of West Africa. Today we have an interesting lecture. It's titled Eshu Elegba, Facing the Past and Facing the Present. And we're really excited about it because it's exploring a cultural practice, a cultural festival that has transcended geographies and generations. And so I will just invite you to enjoy yourselves, and I will hand over the mic to the duo of Ola and Julia to take us through the journey of Eshu Elegba, the past and the present, and maybe the future.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we're pleased to be here. And also in this Easter week, it's quite a timely time to have this talk, which will actually talk about one of the festivals which now is firmly placed on the Easter calendar in one of the cities we'll be talking about. But before I start, I'm Professor Olaoduku, and I'd like to introduce you to
Julia Rabello,
who is currently doing a PhD.
Yeah, so I'm currently doing a PhD here at the University of Liverpool, with a focus on Lusophone country Guinea-Bissau. So that's why we're making this relationship. I'm Brazilian, so that's where this idea came from of us presenting today together.
Right. Okay, and as explained, the title is Eshu Elegba. Eshu is one of the gods within the cosmology of Yoruba religion, and it's the god that both looks to the future and looks to the past. But we've also been told by our colleague here, Professor Tabat Hamilton, that it's one of the gods that is venerated in trade and so on, because with Eshu on your side, you have balance, you have no conflict, you have development in your business activities. So it's actually quite relevant to our understanding of the festivals we're talking about, which are both based or focused on a lot of relationship to Yoruba religion and Yoruba culture, both in this case in Latin America, particularly Brazil, and obviously in West Africa, we're looking particularly at Nigeria. So to start off, we will show you the first slide, which we're about to show. So what we're going to do is to introduce you to the idea about celebrating festivals or carnivals, or in the case of Lagos, it's called Fanti as a festival. And what we're doing is looking at these festivals, both in terms of what they are in the different places where we're looking at them. So we're looking specifically at a festival called, as a celebration called Carnaval in Brazil, and we're comparing it to a celebration which is similar and has interesting links and origins, which takes place in Lagos, Nigeria, which is now called Fanti. So the way we're structuring the talk is to have these three parts. One is to do with the history. So we're talking about the history behind both of the festivals and indeed contextualizing it, giving you the idea about why these are transnational festivals. Then we will go on to compare the two festivals. And then finally, if you like, we'll do a kind of analytical part where we look at that comparison of the history and think about what the past has shown us, where we are at the present, and obviously we'll think about what the future is. So that's where we behave like the goddesses issue. So I think over to the next slide, and yes, I think I will continue talking at this point. So what we're saying is that, just so that you understand, as has been said about AHUWA itself, we're an international research center. And in the case of coastal heritage, which is one of the areas that we have actually a research project that we're involved in, and indeed is led by Professor Lawanson here, we're looking at coastal heritage and urbanism across the world, but focusing on West Africa. You can see from here, Lagos, the focus of one of the festivals, is a coastal city on the West African coast. And the same thing with Rio de Janeiro, which is what used to be the capital of Brazil, it's now Brasilia, but it's also a coastal area. Not for this talk, but when we develop the full paper, the interesting thing to say here is that Bahia, which is I was going to use the cursor, Bahia is where most of the enslaved people from Lagos, from West Africa, were transported in the first instance. So there's a whole culture around Bahia and its capital, Salvador, which is part of this discussion about festivals. But for the purposes of today's lecture, we are looking specifically and only at Carnaval, which takes place in Rio de Janeiro, and also the Fanti Festival, which takes place in Lagos, Nigeria. And just to say that Carnival, we think, is probably the largest street party in the world. So it's got really interesting as Julia will now discuss when we move to the next slide, its historical origins are very interesting, but this is the biggest festival, despite really the people who've been involved in it really coming from the Bahia area of Brazil, but it's to do with it being the capital city and so on, which we will talk about later. So whereas Lagos, again, capital city of the Lagos Protectorate to begin with, then the Nigeria until 1976, when the capital moves to Abuja. So again, private kind of city, coastal, and not only the place where, again, returnees, when I talk about that, come to, but Lagos is one of the major cities. So this is I guess the Atlantic, this is really a transatlantic connection and lecture that we're going to be developing as we continue the discussion. So over to Julia, who will now talk about Rio and Carnaval.
Yeah, just to complement a little bit, Ola mentioned the Carnival in Salvador, but also when we develop a little bit more of our research, we will see that there's a lot of connection from other carnivals in Brazil, other important carnivals in Brazil. There is Carnival mainly in the entire country, but you can see that we have 4 that are the most populated, you can say. There is also Recife Carnival, that is in Pernambuco, and in Maranhão that we will see a lot of relations with Carnival in Nigeria specifically, and also Benin.
Yes, Benin.
Yeah, so I think we can get a lot of information. We chose Rio, as Ola mentioned, because mainly, I think because of the symbols, we can see a lot of symbolic, the masqueraded and the costumes, we can see a lot of relations, but we could do this research in other places in Brazil also, I think. So some photos of the beautiful Carnival in Rio. Just to bring a little bit of the historical timeline of Rio. the carnival started in Rio specifically with the Trudeau festivities that were Catholic Portuguese tradition. It was a period of brilliant as it is today, but it was a carnival that happened in the streets, and we still didn't have the end of the slavery period in Brazil by that time. So it also happened inside the houses, but in a violent way throughout the slaves were only the proper the owners could throw things. So the main idea was to throw things in the streets, eggs and even dejects. So this was the main idea of this carnival. But then it got prohibited because it was a big, the city became really filthy at that moment. And also there was this time when the French balls started to enter the culture of Brazil. So those masqueraded balls that also happened in Italy entered the culture of the elite. But the popular carnival existed throughout the time, so it never stopped, and people were in the streets either using this Catholic facade, either when the slavery period ended, they were more free to use this Afro-Brazilian culture. So it always happened in parallel to these festivities of the elite that happened inside closed space. So by the 30s, popular street carnival became bigger and bigger and bigger, and the samba was created. The samba was created by a woman. They say it was by a woman who was a slave person before and went from Salvador to Rio to. So
you may need to explain to me what samba is.
Sorry. Samba is a type of music, but also a type of dance in Brazil. It was raised, it was born in Rio. So it's the major type of music that represents the carnival specifically in Rio. In other parts of Brazil are different. So it's also a music and also a dance. I separated one song. We can play it at the end of the presentation. So in Brazil, there was the start of the dictatorial period in the 60s. So there was this state regulation of the carnival. It couldn't happen anywhere anymore. So there was a division of the streets where it could happen. Division of the government decided where it could happen. The roots. The roots, yes. And then in the 90s, there was this expansion of the carnival to Brazil, to the entire. So ever since I was a child, I remember that we watched Carnival from Rio and after from São Paulo also on the television. And they created this, it's called Sambódromo, that is a closed space where they have this carnival now. So they have a big parade. That's what you can see in the television. It's a big parade where there is a lot of groups that compete amongst each other. So those photos that I showed you before were in the parade. This is the carnival that normally you know from Rio, but it also coexists with a street carnival that is really big. I've been to the street carnival, not the carnival that is Sambódromo's one. So the carnival in the streets is really spread throughout the city. It happens in the city centers. It happens in elite neighborhoods. It happens in lower income neighborhoods. So it's very spread and very, can say that is for the entire population of the city, because you choose where you want to go, you choose where you want to be. And different from the Sambódromo that is paid, you need to, normally it is constructed by the population that is in lower income neighborhoods who bring this heritage, bring this perspective of them, but you need to pay, so the public is different from who is organizing the carnival. So there's this coexistence of street carnival and this mega spectacle that happens in the São Paulo.
Right, so if I now talk about the Lagos Festival, well, what we now have is what is called Fanti. But really, it's evolution as a festival taking place, in this case, at the end of Lent. So the Rio Carnival is at the beginning of Lent. Lent is the period of the formalized church, the Catholic and particularly the formal Protestant churches, where you fast for the 40 days before the crucifixion of Christ. And in the formal religions, particularly the Anglicans and the Catholics, you will be expected to eat everything you need to eat before the event, and therefore, in the case of what we've just heard in Rio, there's this festival before you go into Lent. In the case of Fanti, it's at the end of the period. It's on Easter Day, so at the end of this Lenten period, when you're celebrating, is when the Fanti Festival happens. It's currently is, as you can see, there is a route that has been developed, and it's being it's being funded to a large extent by the Lagos State government. This is a rather complicated map, but what you probably want to look at is the timeline in the center, because that explains what's happened over time. Now, in terms of the way in which it evolved, in the period of transatlantic slavery or enslavement, we had a situation at the end of the slavery period, which was about the 1830s onwards, 1835, 1861 is when the British actually abolished slavery. But even before then, in parts of the world of the Americas, so both Latin America and to a lesser extent America itself, slaves were able to buy their freedom in some cases, or sometimes their owners let them become free. And there are some early former slaves who were able to buy their freedom and move back to where they had originally been captured and enslaved. Now, West Africa was one of the major areas of transatlantic slavery. That's for another story of the lecture. And a lot of these enslaved peoples came from places like the Yoruba area in Nigeria. So they were able to buy their passage back and often find their routes, which were not necessarily Lagos. It would be further up country in places like Abeokuta and other parts of Western Nigeria. But the reality is they came back and they often came with considerable skills. Often, particularly for the Brazilian slaves, were very returnees because they were no longer slaves. They're actually called emancipados, which means emancipated people. So they came with a lot of skills. They had, often if they had been able to buy their passage, they had some wealth. They'd already become small traders. They worked in Lagos particularly and were very close to the Oba of the time and were actually given areas of Lagos where they could set up their own communities. One of the major areas was actually called Bobo Aguda, and that becomes part of their name. They start being called the Agudas. Other places too, in Ghana, they're called the Tabo. Other areas, the Amarus, but certainly in Lagos and Nigeria, the Aguda area is often known as the area where particularly the Brazilian returnee emancipated people came back to. Also, there were some from Cuba as well. Now, what happens in this case is that they're bringing back with them some of the traditions and practices that they have had in the old country, in Brazil, and so on. And one of these things was both the idea about performance, tradition, and indeed the things that underpin the Rio festival about when it happens. But also food practices. Feijão, as we call it in Lagos, is actually feijão. And there's mingau, which is a kind of tapioca meal. And around Easter again, the fish stews and so on. So this and all the performative practices around that meant that smaller communities and their names like Pereira, Darusha, Da Costa, Pinheiro, the names that they come back with are the names often of their enslaved names, the names of often their original slave owners. Most keep those names, but you have situations like the Alakinja and Alade families where they actually renounce their emancipado and slave names and take on Yoruba names. But generally, you can find these particularly Portuguese-related names that relate to the Aguda area in Lagos. So these groups on feast days like Easter and so on and indeed at Lent would eat have these foods that they have brought back, the recipes they brought back from Brazil, and they would also have smaller performances. Somewhere like Campos Square, which still exists in Lagos, just about, which again was was in ownership of a prominent trader from Brazil. There would have been these performances, but they were much smaller performances, and they were never part of a bigger, a bigger festival. It seems as though from about the 1900s onwards, when we're in the colonial period, the fact that these returnee Emancipado Agudas were very strong traders, were very good at construction and other things, they became much more incorporated into middle class or upper middle class society in places like Lagos. They were very much involved in setting up the original church religions, the first the first Catholic church and its congregation was actually performed in Portuguese. So effectively, they were a significant part of the Catholic community in Lagos at the time. They were also involved in constructing things like both Holy Cross Cathedral and actually the mosque in Lagos. Their craftsmanship and skills were known, and what you can see on the image there, the purple italicized houses are known Brazilian houses that are of great interest. The water house is still there. The Lojumba was demolished in 2017. Elephant House is now Elephant House too. But there's some of these houses that are known as having Brazilian culture. And it also informed architecture and other parts of cultural life in middle class Lagos at the time. But in terms of the festivals and so on, this seemed to have stayed very much amongst the smaller communities that existed that were from Brazilian and returning Macedonian areas and cultures. By the 1960s, we come into a time, I would say, in Nigeria where anyway, the heritage is much more towards what I'd call cultural modernism. There's an idea about Nigeria being one country, and we all have cultures, they're many and varied. But I would say that the ideas around bringing festivals like what has now become Fanti to the fore really start around Festac in the 70s, when Nigeria is a very rich country, and it's about showing to the world, in this case, the Festival of Arts and Culture for Africa and its environment. It was good to be able to say that we have these different forms of cultures, particularly in a place like Lagos. So you have the book Building Lagos by Kunle Akinsemoyi and Alan von Richards. Akinsemoyi is part of a Saro family, which have roots from Sierra Leone and also the Americas. Von Richards is from the Von family that also have this Aguda background. But they talk about the different buildings in Lagos. Around this time again, also, we get the beginnings of these festivals. So Fanti seems to have started properly in terms of it being more than just little compounds within Lagos as a festival from the 1980s onwards. And it continues, but it has stops and starts. It's happening in the background, but mainly in the smaller communities, those communities that have links to Brazil and so on. But it seems as though the major Fanti festival is about the turn of the century, 20s, 29, 10, up to 14. The most historic record I can find digitally is the Fanti Festival in 2014, which was taking place at Christmas. So this was the first time the idea about it being funded and having recognition outside of these smaller compounds happens around the 20,000, and by 2014 it's happening at Christmas in and around Lagos. But from Fanti 24, so about 3 years ago, we have it moves to being at the end of Lent, and also it gets much more funding from the Lagos state government, and is also part of a much more national idea about these are the bits of culture that make Lagos special. And the Fanti Festival is a festival that they hark back to its roots. A lot of those who are now 5th, 6th, 7th generation Agudas are part of the committee, and they've continued with this, and it looks like this year's, which is happening on Sunday, is going to be even bigger. Interestingly as well, if we look at the bottom line, we're talking about the architecture from coastal dwellings and the terrible barracoons where enslaved people were transshipped, to a situation where we now have the J.K. Randall Center, which has a museum of Yoruba heritage. So there's almost a circularity, because the procession, as we'll see, ends up in this museum of Yoruba heritage. So there's that link between the history and the way in which I would say space informs the way in which the procession now. So it now has a procession very similar to what Julia was talking about in terms of the dome. There's a specific procession that is now becoming part of the festival, where it ends, it goes past the center and then it ends in Tafawa Balewa Square, which is a major area that we have major events in Nigeria and Lagos in particular. If we go on, some of the things, so at the different stops in the route, which I think we'll have later on, we have different things happening. Did we not have my route? Yeah, that's it. That's the route. So it's starting in a part of Lagos, which again has there are 7 communities, and I don't have all of them down. You have to go to the website. But it's around Itapaji, Sandros, areas where there are large known communities of people who have Brazilian extraction, Aguda stock. And they go right round and they end up past the Museum of Yoruba Culture, and then they go into the Tafawa Balewa Square. But at these different places, different things are happening. So some places, like in the Campus Square area, the carreta, which is a kind of display and dance, which comes straight, we can see from things that were happening again in the historic parts of the festival in places like Rio. It has much more links to the mask and the masked ball and so on. So that's again a direct link to what still happens in Brazil. And then Bumba Meu Boy is a particularly interesting one. This is the performance of the ox. So the ox, here we are. So there's an ox and it does this performative dance. Now this we have found out comes from Maranhão, which again has stayed in Brazil. I mean, we don't really have oxes as such in Nigeria, but that whole idea, go back to that picture, it just shows you how some things literally come straight through. But there's some really direct links to things that are happening in the Brazilian carnival situation. Now, we have to remember that some of these returnees continue to have families on both sides of the Atlantic. So some of these might have come with the returnees. Some would have come because these links between Brazil and Nigeria, particularly Lagos and Rio and Bahia, continue right to today. But I had always heard of a boy. This is why I have to claim self-interest. My mother would say, my boy, I had no idea what she was talking about. But I can understand. And it is actually a performance. So, you know, you're really having these transnational things happening at this level. And it enriches the carnival. So although we have the route, there are then these 7 different communities who perform. They have different performances before everybody ends up in Tafawa Balewa Square for a major celebration. What I haven't been able to find out is whether there's any musical theme per se. There is music, but not in the same way, I think, as music is used to articulate the festival in Rio. I mean, the idea about samba, we don't have, but we do have obviously Yoruba music, which then integrates into the whole idea about festival and carnival, but they're different things. And in fact, our first picture had the dragon dance, which is actually a Chinese New Year event. So even the performances are over time changing, but we'll talk about that near the end. And that's well, you can still get the tickets if you're in Lagos. Nura, go get your tickets. But yeah, so I'll now move over to the route. I think Fiona will talk about in terms of well, okay, I'll finish my roots thing and we'll go back. So as I said, it's within a described area of Lagos, although actually places like Sangros and Isaleko are further away. But so what's happened now is that, if you like, there's been a creation, I would say, of a route. And what's happened is the 7 communities that make up now the areas that we think of that have been recognized as having a good relations and so on. They now come to that route, and there are points where these different performances, so my boy will happen somewhere, the carreta will happen somewhere, the dragon dance will happen somewhere. It looked like there was an interesting one about people in cars from the 1920s and top hats. I think that might be the Omoni society. So there are societies again that are part of what is both European and also includes some Yoruba characteristics. There's probably also some Orisha relationship as well. So you have this mix of both the formal and the formal religion and look back to historical parts of Yoruba religion and so on. So it's a real métis, I guess would be the word actually in French. It's a mixture, but the area that they have used, Ololi particularly, is very much part of this Fanti Carnival. That's terrible. Well, is an area that is known to have had Aguda residents, so on. So, and also what's happened is the Aguda is not the only returning group. There's also Saro influence and so on. So in many ways, it's a festival. Fanti is now happening, it seems to be very much located immediately after Lent, Easter, and this is the new arms. And over to Gina, who will probably summarize the Rio-it.
So Ola just presented the Fanti route, and I was thinking about the carnival from the Sambódromo and also the carnival that I mentioned that happened in the streets. And I think it's more similar to what happens in the streets. As you can see here, this is a government, it's from the government of Rio, and it shows which streets should be closed for the carnival, which should be opened. So where the we call it blockings are going to pass. And this is one of the, I don't know, hundreds of blocos that we see in Carnival through this period of 2 months,
Yeah.
of course. So it is really related to this route where the blocking just walks in the street and may choose some specific place to go out in the city center, some building that is heritage building, but it doesn't have to be like this. We have also blockings in the beach, so we just go through the beach. So it's not something that is related to buildings or something. But you also have the Carnaval de Sambódromo, which you can see there in the picture that there is a square, a praça, da Apoteose, where the cars and the parade crosses, and you just sit, so you just watch what is going on. You don't participate. You can dance where you are, but you're not inside the parade.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and it's quite expensive. I've never been to that one, but it's quite expensive, especially because they have this, I don't know how to say it in English, but they have this bait spaces that are only for famous people.
Hospitality, yeah,
Hospitality.
yeah.
So it's really, really expensive. So the carnival now is in this dilemma that people who are making it cannot always see it as a spectator, as the others can, but it's this route. So it just goes through to a square, we call it a square, and just passes by, and people are watching and participating in a way that is not as you can see in this picture. That there's a concert here. This is the more traditional carnival from my point of view, where you just participate and there's music and you dance and you go out, you will come back. So it's more dynamic than this one where you just sit and watch what's going on.
Corporatized.
Also, this is the Reirão do Samba, where you can there are concerts and then you can have this more participatory perspective. This is Carnival today. Of course, this is what you see normally in television. So the money goes to this one. Of course, there is some financing and there is some organization here, but by the government and financing. But here you see that the money goes to this carnival, which could be an issue. Something to be further discussed.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So that's it. And then just to show again, I guess contextually again, that's what's happening on Sunday. But it's part of a wider thing about Lagos Island heritage. So we know now that in January, December, we have the AO Festival. So there's another festival that happens around then, and there's Dirty December, that's part of, I guess, a more contemporary idea about how things happen at a cultural level. So it's part of, I think, what's becoming a tourist-focused cultural offering that the state of Lagos is now actively creating. It's interesting because there are other areas of heritage, but for various reasons, geopolitical and otherwise, the reality is probably people are coming to if they're going to come and do heritage at the moment, Lagos is the most likely place. There's very interesting heritage in northern Nigeria, but for various reasons, that's not working. And the same thing in bits of eastern Nigeria, Calabar and so on. But in many ways, I think with Dirty December, this Fanti Carnival, and with the AO masquerades, this has become indeed as, well, it's now, I think it's still saying Lagos Island, but it's seen as part of a national idea, push towards, I would say, carnival activities. And interestingly as well, closing the loop, we now have the Afro-Brazilian Economic and Cultural Exchange Summit. So it's again acknowledging this link. So it's very much this issue about having, I guess, transnational links between particularly, I would say, the Lagos link to Brazil, which, as I had said, historically actually never ever stopped. But I think there are these starts and stops about it being more prominent. So now again is a positive period where there's a lot of links, or there have been moves to develop more links between, particularly, although they're saying Afro-Brazilian, it's really much more I think the Nigerian-Brazilian link. Although having said so, I haven't researched enough to know whether, for example, Bena used to be Dahomey is involved in this as well. But this looks like it's mainly within the Nigeria, particularly the Lagos perspective. So I think we can now move to what we're going to call the comparisons, which have more or less begun to start. So I guess if we take each topic and we just add bits ourselves, so I guess to me this relationship to religious peace and timing is really interesting. It is very close in the sense that both the festivals, but particularly the Rio Festival being linked to just before Lent, and now the way in which Fanti has placed itself just after Lent, you have this timing very much related to activities within a certain calendar. This is the Christian calendar, but I think there's probably also links to Yoruba tradition and religion as well, but I don't know, do you want to say anything about when it's been, has it always been at this Lent period of Rio festival?
Yeah, it's always been Let's Be.
So that links directly to its original history around Catholicism and the ways in which the Europeans would have had these, yeah, it's a festival in the Catholic Church, I think just before Lent. But it also changes into these masked balls and so on. Whereas I think in Nigeria it has moved. It was more around Christmas among smaller families who were at Milan. So, but it's moved to Fanti really seems to, or Fanti moving to being Easter seems to work well in its, I guess, backwards linking to its original origins from those who came from Brazil and so on, and started these. So if we then think about space, I think as Julia has said, and she can expand again a bit more on it, the idea about these spaces being either local or now very corporatized. So you have the Samba Dome and so on, where you pay a lot of money and then you watch it all. I think we're getting to that in the sense of Nigeria, where you now buy your tickets. But you can either participate at local level, you become one of the communities, so you call them locals, we call them communities. Or you can buy your ticket, presumably, and go and sit in Afro-Brazilian Square, and the festival will come to you. Do you want to say anything about space again as well?
Yeah, just to mention that I think the main point here is that Carnival in Brazil also used to be something produced by people locally and produced in their neighborhoods, and it expanded. It has become what it became today. And what Lola mentioned, Fanti is going to that direction. Brazil still has its traditional roots of having these local carnivals, but I think the main point is that where is the money going to, and where is the actual conversion of money, and maybe this could be brought to a reflection of Lagos also.
And then I guess participants, as said, I think originally it would have been with families, but again, very much like Rio, you can participate now. You don't have to be a Ferreira or a Pereira. In fact, it says so on the website. You can join a community and you get involved in whatever performance they're doing. So the participation at community level or at local level in Rio is something that is open to everybody. It's not closed. It's not a closed society as such anymore. People are actively encouraged to become part of these different community processions, which I think seems to be similar to.
Yeah, from what I saw, I think we have two perspectives, a good one and a bad one. So it is open to everybody. Everybody can participate, but also we have this spectator participant seeing the Sambódromo that is not very positive anymore, as you can, who's producing can participate. But it's also positive because Carnaval in Brazil has become something for everybody. So it's not something that Afro-Brazilians participate. So their culture is really involved around Carnival, the opposite actually. But everybody in Brazil participates in Carnival, and I think it has become something of a national identity that wasn't at the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's similar because again, as I said, you can pay a lot of money and presumably go to Afro-Brazilian Square and have a box and watch it all happen, or you can be part of the participation. But it seems to me at the moment we've not yet got to the stage where it costs so much. I suspect those who are processing will end up in Afro-Brazilian Square and they will be able to see this. It looks like you've got the hyper commercialization in Brazil where you can buy your tickets and all you do is go and watch it come through to you, which comes to the focus. I think that's the issue, that maybe the focus remains around this celebration, but I just wonder whether, as things have changed, the focus has moved from probably it being much more of a religious, whatever it is, syncretic celebration to being very close to commercialization and areas of tourism as such. But it seems as though, again, that continuity and focus thing, they probably are a couplet, they work together. These communities, at least in Lagos, have been there. And okay, even at certain times when it's been quite quiet and they haven't really had the money to do a big festival, it's been there, but now it looks like the focus is moving up again, and it's very much about tourism and being able to, I guess, capitalize on it as a festival that has international links and involves more than just the communities who are part of it. Okay, so we're going rapidly to our near to the end slides where we now talk about what we see the future being. So I think very much related to again what the UCH lab is involved in. This is very much a case of how heritage, I think, links to a tourism focus in itself, although I think there are really real questions around the authenticity. So I said the roots and where the heritage is, they don't necessarily totally match in terms of the physical, but it's clear that the essence of the festival, I would say, continues in the sense that it's performance. But again, so some of it is very historical, like the Megoi, and some of it you have the Chinese dragon dance, but it's all part of an idea about celebration and performance in this case. Whereas maybe one could, I guess you could argue about how authentic is the heritage, because if you're going to go around most of the bits of Lagos that do have these AHUWA links, it will be more than what has now been described. But what has been described is very useful for tourism purposes and being able to, I guess, contain the festival and really show it at its best for all involved. And it seems to work well with those who, if you like, have the original heritage and those who are developing the heritage as it is now and probably as it may be in the future. So the idea about heritage being insular and not changing is not there. And that's probably true because even in religion and so on, religion changes. So we're talking a lot about the Catholic link, but there are these other bits of religion and culture that are being very much incorporated into a festival like Fanti. So so even the timing compared to when it originally was around Christmas or whatever, all that is up for grabs, but it's still creating, I would call, a contemporary heritage, and it looks like that's what will follow. I don't know if you want to say something about heritage.
Yeah, I think from Brazil's perspective, the Carnival being linked to religion is something that is being lost because most people don't even know it is a Catholic
In the first place.
Yeah, it just go for the celebration and it's really lost its main goal. So most people don't even know what they're celebrating. And also this relation with Afro-Brazilian culture. I've seen some debates on because, for example, Rio this year actually went out in the news of Nigeria and a lot of countries that brought Yoruba's culture to the parade. So there were a lot of symbols of Yemoja. So there's a debate on how authentic that really is. Who is producing that? Who is if it is dedicated only to the tourism, or if it really is trying to bring this heritage back to the carnival. So this is a discussion that we have today of what really is authentic and what is not.
There you are. But I think a good thing is the socio-economic development. I think for better, for worse, despite it being very commercialized, there is a level of socio-economic development that I think at local level is not a bad thing. A lot of these communities where they are now are in really poor areas. So even if the rich Agudas don't live in Saliko anymore, the idea that you have a festival that encompasses areas of the city that, have become part of it, I think that has to be positive, although as Julia says, we don't know where the actual final money goes. But in some of these communities, it is something that it looks like the community themselves get involved in, whether or not they've got Yoruba roots or whatever. I mean, a lot of Isalico, for example, is Igbo traders or whatever, but people get involved in it as an event, and it looks like particularly there are children involved and so on. So I think there's something positive about what it does to areas that, I guess in the 70s, at the height of Nigeria's oil boom, it was all about building new buildings, taking people out, decanting people, maybe giving them new housing if you're lucky in places like Sule, often you just put on the streets. But with something like this, there's a return to this is important, we have a heritage, even if it's not as authentic as it should be. It's something that, if it continues the way it seems to be continuing, is an annual thing that gets some funding from wherever into an area as poorer community and gets them as part of this successful festival that people come to see from, that becomes almost international in its activities. And it spans into the food, the culture, the guest house that I often use in Lagos nowadays. It's part of it. The guy that used to be a DJ, apparently he's doing a DJ set. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with Fanti, the music that he's doing. But it's part of a whole communal activity in these, we call them lockers, we call them communities. Do you want to say anything about that?
I already mentioned some socioeconomic issues. I think there's no doubt that in Brazil it generates a lot of money. It generates a lot of jobs, not only during Carnival, but throughout the year. So it is positive in that way. Of course, debates exist on where this money is going. So, but it brings a lot of economic development, social development to Brazil. There are a lot of social programs related to Carnival that brings young kids to producing Carnival, so taking them out of the streets. So there are a lot of actions throughout involving Carnival. So you can see it as positive and not so positive sometimes.
The urban spatial, the same thing. I mean, I said, in the case of the Lagos one, they literally had to create this route. So as the city again develops, when we have the next growth spurt, it's how long can we keep these spaces without them becoming like, I was sort of saying, the example I would give is New York, where I found out where if you look in the history, it tells you where the original Negro burial ground is, that's what they called it. But it's in the middle of Manhattan. It doesn't stop them building new business blocks, but if you know where to go, you can find out where these original spaces are. I suspect that in the Lagos case, again, you can't stop to be honest commercial development. So how much of this original space that relates to the Aguda areas and so on can we keep? We've already lost the Iloja Bar in 2017. Bits of Moloney Street are almost gone, but I mean, most of the original footprint is going. So it's the challenge will be, what is the authentic and how can we mark those? Maybe it's a street markers, or in the case of New York, you can actually, they do have an area at the bottom of a 20-story commercial building showing the excavations they had and where these graves were and so on. Maybe that in the longer term, you might have the spatial roots, but there's nothing there to show anything about the architecture and so on of the culture, of the Aguda culture at the time. So that will be a challenge, but it's a challenge everywhere where you have rapid development. So even if the development happens, it's how we are able to record and, I guess, celebrate the histories that came before. And then also the museum itself, the Museum of Yoruba Culture. There are places where some of this history will go. So you don't have to read books, but there might be other places where you can see bits of past culture.
In relation to Rio, I think the main points would be to have this coexistence of what's going on in the street or what's going on as a ballroom. So just that it keeps going on and keeps working, because I think in the future it may not happen. They may define the places for these street carnivals and make it another symbol. So I think they need to coexist, and there need to be ways of keeping it as it is. Of course, improving. There are several things to improve, but this is the main issue.
I think the international networks, we said that they have this conference that's happening at the end, so I don't think there's any problem with that. I think it's good that we're now talking. I think the fact that Nigeria is talking to so I should also say that obviously the other places for Carnival are places like Trinidad in the West Indies, and indeed in Lagos, in London, the Notting Hill Carnival. So there are other spin-offs as well, but for this talk, we're looking specifically at the Lagos Rio connection. So these networks do exist, and it looks like they will continue to. Because in the, I know that in the Notting Hill Carnival, this idea about cultural critique and music. So in Notting Hill, obviously it's reggae, but doesn't necessarily need to be obviously, but it's coming from the West Indian carnival culture. So there's a whole critique. There's normally a song, a carnival's song, that is something to do with the critique, and it's in reggae systems and so on. Whereas in Brazil or Rio, you've got the samba that's happening. So that's something that is interesting in terms of how it changes slightly internationally how these narratives work. But these, yeah, I think that's something that will probably continue. And if you're saying that they're flying over Urubas to grace the Rio Carnival, these connections will continue. I think, yeah.
In Salvador, we have the samba reggae.
So total. And so now we're into the inheritance transfers. I think this one will be interesting because I was sort of saying in my day it's mother to daughter or whatever. She taught me how to do fragile or whatever. I think that's going to be interesting as we move into a case where everybody's doing everything. So who are the holders of the so-called culture? But then again, culture is fluid, as we've said earlier. This is the kind of more deeply anthropological, sociological thing about what happens when it's fifth, sixth, seventh generation. How do we transfer it? Do we have high priestesses of Carnaval? Because it's the inheritance thing, I think, is changing. I would say I'm relaxed about it. There's some who might say, oh, well, this is really taking us away from the original culture, but then what was the original culture? I think you're saying that in the debate about is it really Afro-Brazilian anymore anyway, it's become more so dispersed. And that goes back to identity narratives. So how do you identify? I think there's a theoretical thing around, in the case of Lagos, these are much more middle-class people, or people who have come back from the horrors of enslavement, but they come back with a lot of both economic, social, and cultural capital. So it's different from being very poor slaves in Brazil. These are middle-class people. They had an identity. They're able to say, this is how we do things. We remember when we were in Brazil, for better or for worse. That is probably going to change as we understand Carnival, or indeed Fanti today. Looks like it's moving more towards the real thing where everybody can participate in it. You don't need to know the history. And it's interesting if when you look on the website, it says, why is this important? In other words, this thing is a carnival, but do you know what it means and so on? So that whole narrative is something that I think in terms of tourism and heritage, one needs to look at. Because if you're just getting people on, okay, those bombs on seats, you create that really expensive ticket. People just come in, they fly and they do things. Or do you really want to spread that historic narratives, and how do you do that?
Yeah, actually, Fanti's website is much more around this than Brazilians' websites for Carnival. So you see a little bit of history, but it's not around that anymore. It's around what's going to happen, where should it happen.
This is gonna happen.
So doesn't for history. Of course, it is there. You can read something, but it's not as in fancy website that you actually have the history and history of the buildings. So I think we lost it a little bit.
I think it's again a debate. Yeah. I think we're now on to future. I think that might be our last slide. I'm not sure. Yeah, and that is the J.K. Randall Centre, which I hope Mira will at some point go and see if you've not seen it already. It's around the corner from from Boyle Street, which is interesting again because I think actually what's his name is part of this Agudon as well. The architect, he was Nigerian, but he was trained in Nottingham, and he says this is supposed to be a reworking of fabric. So the kind of weave that you find in Ashoke, which is a cloth that is it's traditional to Western Nigeria. So you've got the contemporary in which the container now has histories of Yoruba culture. Although J.K. Randall himself was a doctor, and it was the first public swimming pool in Lagos, so it has that link again as well. He felt that young Nigerian children needed to know how to swim because far too many of them were drowning. And if you were rich, you had the pools, particularly, and then it was semi-segregated city. So this was a public swimming pool for the local community in and around Lagos. So it was a benefaction to the city, which again, a lot of these are leaders and science were very good at doing something medicine as well. So I think that's where we end, and still more we haven't said. We have references to start. If you want to do more, otherwise you can follow the Fanti Festival. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing. So we hope to develop it further, but I think we both enjoyed working together, haven't we?
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you very much. That was really a walk through both Lagos and Brazil. And I have notes and questions, but I think we should start by asking those online if there are any comments, questions,
Clarifications.
clarifications before we take it forward.
Maybe
Any hands up
if you go to
or
the
comment?
general screen. So
Oh,
we
we
can
have
see
quite
everybody.
in the chat.
Let's look at everybody online. Okay, that's not a lot. Oh my gosh, right. Okay. Drums and moving music. Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
Jura.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting presentation, sort of seeing the entanglements. And yeah, for me also because I went to, I mean, I'm going to Lagos Island now almost on a daily basis for research. But also because I did a tour of Afro-urbanism in Rio. And it was precisely where the carnival ends, sort of where the slaves were brought in, but then also the infrastructures that were emerging and how they were kept separate from the rest of Rio. So it's really interesting to see how it has evolved and also to see how it's branching out and sort of merging with other cultures. Because when I lived in Buenos Aires in Argentina a lifetime ago, there were carnivals as well on a neighborhood level that were combining the sort of Spanish Catholic Lent tradition with the Afro-Brazilian music and candomblé or candomblé and sort of other styles. And at the time, I just found it very cool to dance and at a neighborhood level because it's different to the kind of Lent festivals that we have in Austria. But now seeing how it really branches out and becomes something of its own in its entirety across different geographies is really interesting. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura. All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Anyone in the room? Comments, questions, clarifications?
So someone mentioned that the architect of J.K. Randall is Shehu.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you can also type in your questions or comments in the chat.
Or unmute yourself.
Yes, or unmute yourself.
Jamila? Okay, maybe I should just put in my own 2 cents. What you talked about was really about the expansion of this local heritage and how there is this threat of elite capture, and it's happening both in Lagos and in Rio, and even beyond Lagos, other festivals like the Judeoba, which happens after it's a Durbar that occurs after the Islamic celebration, so similar to the Fanti, but in Djibouti and with the Muslims, this increasing trend towards elite capture is happening quite strongly. And then there was this also idea of the hierarchies of participation. And in Lagos, the Fanti still occurs in the neighborhoods in the Brazilian quarters at Christmas, but it's very localized.
Yeah.
So I guess it's this Easter one that is then projected as forward-facing and becoming more commercialized and all of that. And then the Catholic processions still occur. And I was just wondering whether this idea of the carnival and the processions is a direct appropriation of the religious processions that go through the Stations of the Cross, the reenactment of what's happening at Palm Sunday and things like that. And then what really occurs to me, especially when you talked about the idea of authenticity, and who are the custodians of the culture, is this idea of placing local heritage in a global context, whose voice is heard, whose voice is amplified, and with the hybridization of what the carnival really means, as to even lose, its ethos as is happening in the Rio one. How do we make sure it is, we are still able to preserve or document those knowledges? And then I look at it compared with the Eyo Festival, which has a deeper Yoruba religious root, and it's those who carry the masquerade are still limited to those families. And the hybridization has come in such a way that new Eyo families have been incorporated, but the traditional ones who go to the shrine, who actually do the practice, it has remained relatively untouched over generations. So perhaps there's something to learn from there in thinking about it. And finally, with regards to the Brazilian quarters, I know when Governor Fashola was Lagos State Governor, that was when this idea of identifying places of historic significance started. And he was, a law was enacted, and also the Brazilian quarters, the Brazilian district was actually identified as a place of historic significance. Now, the challenge is from a policy point of view. The law is set in the Ministry of Tourism, whereas the technical expertise that is required to preserve those buildings is in the town planning ministry. And that was how Ilojoba became a victim. Ilojoba was pulled down because it was a distressed building, right, which was correct from the town planning perspective, without regard for the fact that it was a building of historic significance. So I think in thinking about heritage and all of that, we also have to start to, dig a little deeper into the technicalities of how do we preserve the heritage practices and also the built environment heritage that comes with it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, again, in the so-called West, you do have these tensions, but then you have to actually write a statement Because it's not just Ilojoba, there's Bamboshe Street, there's so many others that have gone. And this is the thing, if you have rapid urbanization and poor planning controls and ideas around heritage and significance, at the end of the day, well, the house always wins, the money talks. But yes, there are ways in which we need to address that, because otherwise we will lose this, particularly the built heritage. Whereas I think some of the intangible heritage practices like the food and so on, it's quite interesting to see how that actually seems to have stayed within place. But then again, it's back to this thing about the identities of these returnees. They were Imasibadas. I mean, I would say back to, I think it is Oniru, the Ayo is really ingrained in those who have been on the lands, whereas these are people who come back. And it's part of creating an identity, and then how do you hold it together? I went down many rabbit holes, but some of the things being said, again, I'd heard in passing from my mother, but they were saying, they came as Catholics. They came to a country that was colonized by the British, who are mainly Anglican. Some of them actually had to change from being Catholics to being Anglican. And that in itself had its links to things like the lodge, all sorts of economic and other things. So they were always on the back foot to a large extent. So that ability to hold close what they've always had was something that I think was in tension to what would be the case in the Ero situation. And then there's a whole thing about syncretism. We're only looking at the Catholic bit, because you're absolutely right. Then the Catholic, the whole Stations of the Cross, but then that was the original, I would say, background to all of the festivals, that they followed a Catholic Christian relationship. But then how do you then spin off from there? Because again, the Caribbean ones as well, I don't think anybody's to do Catholic, but it has its own character. So I guess there's something about what will be the identity and character of a Lagos festival, Fanti and so on, which is still evolving because it's, I think it's,
yeah. So there's a question from Tolu Lopez. We'll take the question, and then Nura will make her comment, and then we'll respond, because we really need to round up. Tolu Lopez says, are there options for historic reenactment? So perhaps parts of the Saleko could be reshaped as open air or urban museum. I would say that some of that is already happening, because you still have the sittings under the Abegi and things like that. People are still going back to places in Lagos Island, and the Saleko Descendants Organization are now having things like walkabouts and historic walks around the different neighborhoods. But that's also largely private sector, community-led. Yes. Nura.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something that I had a conversation with Folayemi Brown the other day, who is running the Pada Lagos guest house. And I mean, you know him, but for the others who are there. And the guest house is in Onicon, in the Brazilian district of Lagos Island. And it's in a street where a lot of Afro-Brazilian returnees are located. And I just wanted to add what he told me, which is that a lot of these houses, they're really interesting artifacts, and it would be amazing to sort of refurbish them and sort of make them lived-in heritage. But the problem is another layer of diaspora, that people who returned from Brazil and then lived in Lagos Island then left again, and they now live in other countries. And it's difficult to reach them, and they have that sort of connection to Lagos Island and to the historical part of it, but they also don't really, there's people living in there that look after the house, but it's not really sort of equipped for actually living there. So it's not maintained properly, and it's difficult to have that sort of continuity because people are not actually there. So I think it's another challenge when you talk about preservation and sort of making it or having a revival, or perhaps an urban open air museum. Also, there's a podcast episode coming out about this topic in a few months from AHUWA, so keep tuned, everybody who's there. You'll hear more from Olayemi himself.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting and it speaks to the urban value, one of the issues that we're looking at in the urbanism and cultural heritage. Coastal. In our urbanism and coastal heritage lab, where we're looking at this issue of urban and what's really important in the city, especially with urban transformation and things like that. At this point,
Someone else can look pressed.
Okay,
please.
Hi, hi Ola. Greetings from Edinburgh. So back to my question on cultural reenactment. So there's I think one of the best projects to date on the Afro-Brazilian, at least the architectural legacy of the Afro-Brazilian Lagos, is by Marjorie Alonge. It's a 1994 PhD thesis. So in the context of reenactment and things like loss of, architectural heritage like Ilojo and certain other buildings, I think the between some of the material which is held in the Lagos archives, it exists in whatever state it's in, and Alonge's thesis, it's possible to actually mock up some of these buildings, and I'm just wondering if there's an appetite for that type of activity. So obviously, it's not Shimon Dwale, I don't know why his name is skipping my head. We did a paper on it. But I think that the point is there's so many of these examples, and some of them are recorded and properly documented. And I think it would be good to know how much appetite there is for setting out. So it's not just, Abegi or the Carnival, but literally say what they do in Dubai, or what they do in some of the Scandinavian countries, where you set out you rebuild these things for the purpose of education and for the purpose of history, as it were.
Yeah, I would agree with you. In many ways, actually, the original National Museum and the Museum of Traditional Nigerian Architecture does that, in the sense, but it's the traditional architecture that they are looking at. But I think your wider thing about being able to do that and reenact it, in some ways, the late John Godwin, whose house is now Pada, he was doing a lot of that in terms of measured drawings. People, the students from Unilag at the time, actually taking interest in some of the buildings, although it was a range of buildings. It wasn't just to do with tradition. Jackal House, as I mentioned, is a railway quarters house that's been documented. But there's a project there, definitely. Part of what we're looking at in terms of personal heritage, both how we record it and how we actually engage with policy, so we can actually begin to do these things in a more systematic manner. Because I think, as time out, as I mentioned, you've got the National Museum Commission doing one thing, you've got the planners doing something else. We don't actually join up in terms of what we're looking at. And you've got a hyper-commercial situation where you can probably pay £1,000 for a seat in Tafawa, I swear, to see the Fanti thing. But there's something about being able to work within these to make sure that policy actually happens on the ground. And we educate the next generation. Because part of it again is a lot of that happened. In fact, I think it was an Easter Monday. And in some countries, because everybody will know this is culture, they'll stand around and make sure it doesn't happen. But various things were happening at that point. So being able to sensitize, I think, local communities and indeed those involved is something we do need to do. I think that's why I put down the Building Lagos thing for Festa. That was one of the first times that, that holistic appreciation of Lagos Island and the buildings there was ever in the public domain. You can write a paper, you can write a PhD, but it has to leave the shelves and actually be implemented. The only other place I can think of is Cuba, which is unfortunate in current circumstances, where at the revolution, part of what they did was have indigent families move into some of these historic buildings. So they lived there, but also you could pay an amount to see around the building. But by living there, they were caretakers, which is effectively what you're saying about parts of Mekong now. So how do you get these buildings that we know have historic significance to be cared for, looked after, have that publicity that they don't have at the moment? And you could say that this is not only a problem, to be honest, in West Africa. I went to Valparaiso in Chile, same issue. A lot of people have disappeared. But the place is, it's a tourist thing, people take photographs. But the thing is, it's actually crumbling before our very eyes. So it's a real issue that I think we have to look at, particularly coastal cities, because of their transnational links and so on. But I think here we're highlighting particularly Lagos and Rio and their relationships to these festivals, but the issues that come out, which you've identified, are international, which is why I'm saying there's an international conversation, which is more than just, at the moment, it's all about what they call it again. We call it intangible heritage and physical. We've got two that we need to really look at and tie together. But there's a project there. Let's write the research proposal.
Yes, we're open for business and for collaboration. Thank you very much.
There you are. So,
indeed, on that note, I'm going to invite Nora to tell us a bit about the next urban heritage lecture, as well as the other activities and
discussion about teams,
the podcast and the other issues that are collectively to hear about.
Thank you, Taiba. Thank you, Ola. Thank you, Julia. So yes, we have another urban heritage talk in April with Oredisu, who is the director of MOA, which is the Museum of West African Art.
That's right.
And
Yes.
something, no, just art, nothing else. Exactly. And she's coming on the 15th of April, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Victor, do we have
Yes,
a time?
15th. Yes, 15th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., same time.
Perfect, same time.
Yes.
And it will be exclusively online, so same place for those of us who join from different places to Liverpool. So be there. We will also post it on our LinkedIn page. If you haven't given us a follow yet, then please do so now. I think Victor is just sharing the poster of the next talk with Oredisu. Likewise, we have a podcast which is called Afropolis Plus, which just has the plus as a difference to the Afropolis Festival here in Lagos, which is happening now for a week. Where I think the Fanti Carnival is also part of the Afropolis Festival, or within the umbrella. Yeah, here we see the next talk. So the podcast is looking into different sort of perspectives, issues, contributions within urbanism and coastal heritage in West Africa. So we invite different experts, practitioners, experts in terms of from the practice, but also from academia, from policy, to talk about anything related to urbanism and coastal heritage. So the last episode that came out was with Joseph McCarthy, who is the director of the Sierra Leone Urban Research Center, and he's talking about urban transformations in Freetown and other cities in Sierra Leone. The next few episodes will have a focus on Lagos and Accra, and we'll talk to the Commission of Health of Lagos. We'll talk to a researcher at UCL who is doing a lot of research on transport and health in Accra and Lagos. Yes, so keep an eye out, give us a follow. And then finally, we also have the master's program and the PhD program, which is the master's program is starting in September. So if you know people who are interested in global urbanism and heritage, then kindly link them to us and to check out our homepage. and the master's program on the Liverpool page. For the PhD, we also have scholarships as well as for the masters. So if you're interested or if you know people, please guide them towards us and we can give them more details and information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Something.
yes, we're transiting to having these talks on the Teams platform, but fingers crossed that it will be seamless and
Well, if any of you are having problems with it, we'd like to have feedback because we can, if we have to, I guess, see about having a Zoom link. But our institution here is nudging us all to move towards Teams, but we obviously want to make sure we keep our audience. So if there are issues, do email us or email us through Eventbrite so we can channel, we can know exactly how the transition happens. But note the next RS talk, which you can see in front of you, will be hosted on Teams at the moment. That's what we're planning.
so thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Join the carnival. I think it will also be on YouTube for those of us who can't be as lucky as Nura to be in the middle of the action. And we'll see you on the 15th at the next Urban Heritage Talks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Happy Fanti.
No, Fanti means.
It's from Fantasia. Oh, it's in the research. They think that's where it's from. Yeah, that's it.
I stopped recording.
Um,